What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to show you guys how to change front struts and rear shocks in an 8th generation Honda Civic. Let's get started. So as you might have guessed, step one is remove the wheel. Once you get the wheel removed, take your penetrating oil of choice. Soak everything down liberally. We have to get this hardware out right here for the brake hose that's connected to the strut itself, so make sure you hit that because as you can see this one's nice and rusty. Give that a minute to sit. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this bolt out that holds the brake hose in. I believe that it's a 12 millimeter. It's either a 12 or a 13. As you can see, this one's rather crusty. I'm just gonna pound a 12 on here with a hammer because I think it's just rust swelled a little bit. So if you ever have hardware like this that's feeling like it might break because it's so hard to come out, once you get it broken free and it starts spinning and it starts threading out a little bit, throw it reverse and tighten it up and just keep working those threads back and forth, and it helps big time to keep from breaking bolts off. That and plenty of penetrating oil and you're usually in good shape. Pull that hose out of the bracket. Next thing I'm going to go after is going to be the ABS wiring. It's just clipped into the strut here on the side. I'm going to go in here with a pair of slip joint pliers and just compress the bracket and pull straight out just like that. Once you get that out, next thing you go is the two large bolts that are actually holding the strut in. So the bolts that hold the strut, the nut is a 19 millimeter. The bolt itself has a 17 millimeter head. So hold this side. I'm going to use an impact gun on this one. Maybe. So I'm going to leave the top bolt in just a little bit because what I'm going to do is after we get these two bolts like loose or the nuts off, I'm going to leave the bolt in and we're going to go up to the top and unbolt the top of the strut. When we do that, the bolt holding in the bottom will keep the strut from actually just falling out of the car. Now that you have the bottom of the strut loose, the next thing you want to do is come underneath the hood and pull this weather stripping back just a little bit on the plastic cowl over here. And there's actually an access door. There's an access door for the top of the strut. You have a little pull on it, and there you go. You can reach right in here with a ratchet, and there's 3 bolts holding in the top of the strut. Now that we got the 3 bolts out holding the top of the strut in, I'm going to get the car back up in the air and we're going to pull that 1 bolt out holding in the strut. Once the strut's out of there, we'll go ahead and start bolting in the new one. Alright, I'm going to take out the 1 bolt holding in the strut. The strut should come right out. Couple things before you go putting the new strut in. First of all, there's a dust cap on the old strut that I'm going to transfer to the new one. Put that on the top. Next thing is, if the studs in the top of the strut don't line up with the holes in the body, the top of the strut will turn. So if you hold this tightly, you can make the top of the strut turn left and right. So turn that until the, obviously the studs line up with the holes in the body. So there, get that up into place. Get one bolt back in it like it was before, just to hold it up. I'll get this this other one started as well. Now, as I get this in here, so now what I'm doing is I'm just going to lift up the strut a little bit so I can get the nut started on the top. Once your hardware is tight on the top of the strut, go ahead and reassemble the little door that you took apart to get in there. Put your weather stripping back on. So I got the car back up in the air, and before I tighten these two bolts, there's something that we kind of have to go over real quick. So this isn't going to apply to me because I don't have these, but some cars may have adjustable camber bolts. Adjustable camber bolts did not come on these Civics from the factory. If you take the car in for an alignment and they had issues with the camber, what they would do is they would put an adjustable bolt, usually up in the top of the this top bolt in the strut, and what that does is it lets them adjust the tilt of the tire, either you know, it would be toward the camera or away from the camera. So these bolts are kind of critical. So if you have adjustable camber bolts, you're probably going to need another alignment unless you're able to get them in the exact same location they were before. But even if you do that, chances are, because we're changing the springs, at least I'm changing the springs, you guys may not be, but if you're changing the springs, you're probably going to need an alignment anyway, because there's a possibility that the ride height of the vehicle could be slightly different, which would then throw out the toe setting. So again, something to just pay attention to when you're going back together if you have adjustable camber bolts. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get these bolts tightened up. So we can go ahead and pop our ABS wire back into place. Just clips into the strut. We can go ahead and get our brake hose secured back into the place into the strut. All right, now we can get the wheel back on. Now we're going to move on to the rear shocks. So because I'm shooting a video, obviously I've got to remove this whole panel so you guys can see. You may be able to pull this down out of the way to get to the hardware at the top, but for you guys, I got to remove the whole thing. So to do that, you got to remove this weather strip down here at the bottom. Just pull it loose, and then just pull up on this piece of plastic, and it should pop out of there. That, and then I'm going to reposition you guys and get you facing inside the trunk and show you the hardware you got to remove inside the trunk liner. So to remove this trunk liner on this driver's side, piece of hardware here, 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 and here, and hopefully we can pull this thing at least out of the way so we can get good access to the hardware. I'm just going to use a pocket screwdriver and a cat claw to get this hardware out of here. Pretty standard, you know, just push pins. Pretty common in this kind of thing. Once you get all the hardware out, this thing should be able to at least pull it off to the side and give you guys access to the nut on the top of the shock. So I'm just going to fold that around like that, and we got access to the top of the shock. So the top of the shock is held in with a 14mm nut. Hold on to the washer and the the rubber from the top of the shock. The new one that I bought, at least, you know, didn't come with a new one, so I'm gonna have to reuse it. So after the shock is unbolted from the inside, just like the front, remove the wheel. The bottom of the shock is held in with a 14mm bolt. As you guys can hear, it's rather angry. So the electric impact wouldn't touch this bolt, so I'm going to the pneumatic. Hopefully I have better results. So things on the rear shocks have escalated rather quickly for me. Now, ordinarily, you zip that bolt out, the bolt comes out, the shock comes out, and you start reassembly. Well, because I live up north, the bolt is seized to the metal sleeve inside the bushing, and everything is locked up. I've rounded off the bolt head trying to you know, run it back and forth like I showed you guys earlier in the video. So I am left with one choice at this point. Sawzall. So I'm going to cut the bolt, and once the bolt is cut, the shock will come out, and then I'm gonna have to extract the pieces. All right guys, so I probably spent about a half hour cutting this bolt out of the bottom of the shock. And you know, let's be serious here. If you've seen a guy run a Sawzall for 10 seconds, you've pretty much seen a guy run a Sawzall for a half hour. So I edited most of this out just for the sake of time. But obviously, you know, I cut the left side, cut the right side, got the shock out of the way, and then I also cut off the nutsert that you can see facing the front of the car on the shock bracket. One thing I can say about this is if you guys are doing any serious metal cutting with a Sawzall, the Diablo carbide tipped heavy metal cutting blades, I highly recommend them. I used the same blade for both sides. Both sides on this car were, you know, seized up like you saw in the video, and it chewed through it with literally no problems. The blade's still in good shape, and it's ready for more, basically. But with that said, one Sawzall blade is $15, but I'm here to tell you, it cuts like a $15 Sawzall blade. I'll link them in the description if you guys want to check them out or whatever, but like I said, they're not cheap, but they cut like a not cheap Sawzall blade. All right, so remove the lower bolt by either cutting it out like I had to do, or you know, just removing it. But at this point, the shock is ready to come out. So as you guys saw, I had to cut the bolts out of the rear shock bracket on this thing. Up north, for those of you guys that, you know, live in a nicer climate, generally what happens is, as you guys saw with this one, the bolt that goes through the bushing on the shock actually seizes to the metal sleeve in the shock bushing, and you can get the bolt loose, the bolt will turn because you're turning the entire bushing. So you're trying to pull the entire bushing through the hole, which obviously won't work. So as you guys saw, in that case, the only option you really have is cut it. So I came in straight down with a Sawzall this way, and then I actually came up through the bottom and then went in like this way, and I didn't have any problems. The other thing that I had to do was on the front side, they have a welded on nut to this bracket that holds the shock. I just cut the welded on nut off, and I'm just going to use a nut and a bolt, grade 8 obviously, nut and a bolt right through the hole, and just go about, you know, securing it that way. again, you know, this is something you guys may run into if the car is rusty or, you know, has lived a life up north. All right, so getting the new shock put back into place, put it up through the hole in the body, and then, you know, obviously get it in the bracket. So my local hardware store doesn't believe in stocking, I believe they're 12 millimeter metric bolts that hold the bottom of this shock in. So 1/2 inch won't fit through the shock eyelet, so I had to use 7/16 bolts. So they're a tad loose, but I'm gonna take the car for a test drive and see it, make sure it doesn't start clunking. But at any rate, it's my mother-in-law's car, so if it starts making noise, I'm sure she'll tell me. So the bolt, as I told you, is a little bit smaller than it should be for this application, but realistically, the bolt's not gonna fall out. Worst case scenario, it may make a little bit of noise, and if it does, you know, I'll try and source the correct metric hardware. But being a Sunday in a pinch, that's the only place I could get hardware, was this one hardware store. And like I said, they didn't really believe in keeping metric grade 8 bolts in stock. They had grade 5, but when you're working with suspension parts, you really should be using grade 8. Now that the bottom of the shock is secure, we're gonna go ahead and bolt down the top, put the rubber bushing back into place, large washer, put the new hardware on top. All right guys, after you get the shock all bolted up, you know, obviously just put the trunk liner back in place, put the wheel and tire back on, and you're pretty much done. I'll have links in the description to the shocks, the struts, the Sawzall blades. Hopefully you guys don't need them. But yeah, as always guys, if you guys like the video, hit like. You want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching guys.